Thanks for coming in. Let me just make sure my stream to Facebook is working. Okay, it's working. All right, great. Can everyone see me okay? Refresh. Browser, if any problems. Hopefully everyone can see me and you hear me okay. Thank you. All right, so welcome to the session. I didn't realize we had the session on Easter, but happy Easter. And it's really amazing because we've been talking about the patterns of transformation of caterpillar cocoon into butterfly, and Easter, of course, is the celebration of the butterfly phase, right? In the Christian tradition, of course, Christ, Good Friday, going literally into the tomb, into the cocoon, and then 3 days later, on Easter Sunday, right, coming out of the tomb as the sort of risen Christ, the butterfly. And in pre-Christian, right, I mean, the sort of spring, the beginning of spring, the patterns and the symbols of eggs, of rabbits, are all deeply, I won't get into this, but they're deeply pre-Christian. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. But it's this wonderful symbol of the butterfly phase and this wonderful sort of time of the year and season, actually of life as well, to be, I don't know, like after sort of midlife initiation, right? I mean, in some traditions, those who, receive that initiation into like the second or perhaps third phase of life, depending on how you're counting, are often referred to as the twice born, right? Which is just this beautiful, when we talk about rebirth, right? It is that you are born again, which has Christian connotations these days, but traditionally, people will refer to as the twice born, which is just so beautiful. So anyway, let's get started. I want to say a couple things. First is just that I'm so honored to be with you here in this time of, Easter, so this time of celebration, but also this time overall of, sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you in our sacred space together today. And what I want to do today is I'm going to set sacred space. I'm going to talk about one overall topic. And that topic is going to be what I refer to as circumambulation. And then we'll answer some questions. We have a lot of questions today. So I'm going to try and sort of get through as many of them as I can. And I'll try to talk a little bit faster and maybe be a little bit more concise. Haha. But at least I'll try. And as I go through the questions, I'll try to mark them on Crowdcast with the timestamps so that when you do the replay, you can skip ahead if you want. Then we have an exercise to suggest, and then a poem, and then we'll close sacred space. Okay, so to set space, I'll do what I've been doing in every session and basically say that this is a space that we intend to hold together, devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us all individually to open ourselves to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we receive that. Okay, not from the outside, not from me, not from each other, but from within and above, however you think about it. So we hold this safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. In an opening sacred space today, I'm proposing that we follow the 4 principles of sacred space. The first is confidentiality. And because we're online and these sessions are free and open to the public, the way confidentiality would be done is through anonymization. So if you want to be anonymous, you go into your profile, change your username to Mickey Mouse, and then you post your question. So number one, confidentiality. Number two, no threat, control, or fear. No fixing through tough love. No sales pitches, obviously, but also no recommendations, because that's an exercise of control. I know the solution to your problem, so let me recommend this cool thing that you should check out. It's free. It's just a book. And of course, then if I don't do it, I feel like an idiot, right? So no fixing, no tough love, simply holding space for each other to be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy and relaxed, to be however they want to be in their state of surrender without going in and trying to change their state or interfere with it, right? But you're still active. You're not passive. You're actively holding up the pillars of the temple space, right, and guarding the perimeter so that they can be however they want to be without fear of interference from the outside, and then also obviously without interference from you, right? And that's the nourishment. Back out in the profane, we'll be selling each other our wares and peddling our sort of recommendations and worldviews and everything, and that's great. That's what we do in the profane world. But in the sacred space, the physics are just different. And if we choose to create that space, that's how we create it. The third principle is no commerce. Nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. We're here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We're here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. And then number four, no expectation of participation. There's no pressure to do anything. Again, excuse me, the nourishment of sacred space comes from the held space of your presence and attention. Again, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And then all of us together will tend to amplify that, which is very beautiful. So these four principles: confidentiality, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no expectation of participation. This is what I would propose. And so the way we'll do this online is, if you are not okay with coming into sacred space with us, excuse me, I had some breakfast and it's still catching in my throat. I'm okay. I'm okay. And so this is what I propose we do for the next period of time together. And if you're not okay with it, that's okay. We will give you a moment now to withdraw from the group without any, bad feeling or disappointment or whatever. And then we'll just catch up with you later in the profane. We'll hang out, we'll have a latte, we'll talk business, we'll share our book recommendations with each other. But if you don't want to do that, that's totally okay. And then we'll give you a moment now to step back. Okay. So for now then, with the rest of us, we will move forward together into sacred space. Confidentiality, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no expectation of participation. So the one topic I wanted to talk about today, before we get into the questions, is the topic of, and those of you who do healing stuff with me, you will have heard me talk about this, is the topic of circumambulation. And the meaning of circumambulation: circum is in a circle, ambulation is to walk, right? So walking around in a circulatory kind of spiral motion. And this word refers to what the shape of healing actually is. In the process of a transformation, obviously, you go down from the caterpillar into the cocoon. Within the cocoon, it's circumambulatory. It's stuff is fermenting, stuff is gestating, it's going in all different directions at once. It's not linear, and very often it's very much not predictable. Okay. And so circumambulation is a way to characterize the shape of a healing path a shape of a transformation path, but also just the shape of a life, right? When you go through your life, you will have periods of transformation. You will have periods of victory, of defeat, of happiness, of sadness, periods where you're gunning hard for your bliss, and then you hit a wall, and then you get pitched back into healing, right? You clear the stuff in healing, and then you pitch back into bliss, right? This back and forth motion. In simple terms, you can call it a sort of back and forth, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, kind of a progression, where we recognize that as normal, right? In other words, this 2 steps forward, 1 step back is normal. It's good. It's fertile. It's productive. The 1 step back is equally productive. If you took 2 steps forward, just as an example, and you kept going 4, 5, 6 steps, it would be too much. It would be overdone. It would be unbalanced, lopsided, hubristic, right? And so the 1 step back is equally productive and just as critical. And the feeling overall here is that these healing processes, these processes of bliss, these processes of transformation, I mean, they follow these wiggly, zigzaggy paths because they're organic, right? They are intrinsically nonlinear. It's not like building a building or a skyscraper where it's like control, cold, sharp lines, right angles, linear, glass and steel, stepwise, everything's under tight control, regulatory, issues and all of the rest of it. So it's less like building a skyscraper and more organic. It's more like making wine. It's more like fermentation, right? It's more like gestation, right? And gestating a baby, right? You put stuff in, you prepare everything, and then magic kind of happens from there. And your job while the magic is happening is basically to leave it alone, right? And protect it, but basically let it do its thing, which you neither fully control nor even fully understand what is going on in there, right? Like you feel the baby kicking and you see diagrams and the doctor is kind of like explaining like what's going on, but you don't really know what's going on, right? You have hints, you can feel it. And even with wine, right? You don't really know what's going on in the barrel. You have a different sense for it. And also in the butterfly cocoon, you don't really know what's going on in there. You can describe it in abstract terms, but viscerally, there's no way to know it unless you're like, it's a part of you and you're going through it yourself, right? And so, so this is kind of like sacred space, right? When you hold space for yourself to go through this circumambulatory process, it is sacred because just like I described earlier, you are holding space for this process and protecting it from external interference, and then also protecting it from interference by you, right? By you. And so, you kind of come in, you sit, stuff happens right in this space. You hear things that maybe move you, and then you leave and you feel better, but you don't really know why, right? I mean, that's the magic of sacred space. It's kind of like a nature walk. It makes you feel better and stronger after you spend time in nature, but you can't really share it with language, with linear language. You just kind of know you feel better. You can't really explain why in the linear alphabetic language. Because language is often used to control, right? So it's hard to put your finger on the why, and that's kind of by design. I mean, by the design of the universe and reality. Because if you could put your finger on the why, then you could bottle it, you could commercialize it, you could literally profane it, right, by making it transactional again. And the reason you can't do that is not because God came down and set up these rules. It's because of the physics of the thing, the quality of the space, the sacred itself. Is that the minute you try to sort of over control it, it evaporates because the control itself is what makes it not sacred. It's like, let me, flip on the light switch and still have the darkness. And it's not a punishment when the darkness goes away when you flip on the light. It's just, it's just how it works. I don't know what to tell you. And so profane and sacred kind of work like that. So instead of wagging your finger and saying, well, you're not doing sacred space right, you just kind of relax, get a feel for the physics, And when you want sacred space, you kind of shimmy your way into it. And when you're in it, you know, right? You feel it. So with circumambulation, the typical pattern, right, is to come in close and then run away, and then go in again a little closer and then run away, like a little mouse or a lemur, a small mammal, right? um, and then finally you go in all the way, and you get it, right? You get the big healing, you get the breakthrough, you get liberation, relief, woohoo, right? I'm feeling amazing. Everything makes sense now. How could I have been so stupid? You know, blah, 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 blah. So you get this huge breakthrough, right? This is the pattern, right? And then the next morning, right, metaphorically, in the cold light of day, you laugh it off. You say, oh, it was nothing. I was just being, you know, oh, I was with Artie in Rome and we were eating food and like tasting olive oil and it was so amazing. And I just got ahead of myself and it wasn't a real breakthrough. It was just whatever. I was just getting too excited, right? And the reason, of course, that happens is because when you get a big explosion like that, it's too much for you to handle. So another party who steps in and kind of just dismisses it, right? So you're like, no, I was just too excited. And then after that, what happens? The pendulum swings back again, right? Where you say, okay, it wasn't the silver bullet cure of everything, and it also wasn't nothing. It was something in between. I have eyes to see that something is going on here now. And I have to sort of come in and face this and sit with it more. Okay. So this back and forth itself is not only normal, it is desirable. It is the plowing of the field back and forth that makes the fertility happen. Right? I mean, it is generative, it is productive. You know, so this idea of circumambulation, where we have a lot of questions where it's like, well, I'm not doing enough sacred space and I'm not doing enough this or that. And it's like, you started 2 steps forward, you feel like you're taking 1 step back. And you're like, oh no, I'm taking 1 step back. What if it's 5 steps back? And the view with the lens of circumambulation is like, whatever it is what it is. Right? If you're really holding sacred space, it's like, if you sleep till noon, then you sleep till noon. I mean, that's the whole point. You're like letting go of the reins of the horse and letting the horse guide you. And if the horse takes you in a direction where you've been taught your whole life, you know, we don't go over there, it is an act of faith to let the horse continue. Right? It is an act of faith, metaphorically speaking. Another motif I've mentioned is this whole sort of going from healing and bliss and back and forth. When I teach healing and then bliss, the cycle I see all the time is people go into healing, they clear all this stuff. Everything within you is like rowing in the same direction now. And it becomes this very delicate thing, because before you were rowing in opposite directions. No matter how hard you rowed, you were going nowhere. And now everybody's rowing in the same direction. And so with the slightest, like 5% of your previous effort, right, you just touch the control and the boat goes like shooting forward. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. This is what it feels like when everyone's rowing in the same direction, post-healing. And then the question becomes, well, where do I actually want to go? Because it matters now, right? My navigational map matters now because we're rowing in the same direction. So if I say go there, we're going to go there, right? Manifestation, all this luck, all this stuff. And so healing naturally pitches into you into questions of bliss. Because if you ask the question of where do I want to go, and I'm not asking it out of fear anymore, I'm asking it out of love, out of my desire, out of my natural pattern within me. Those of you who've taken the bliss program, it's the Ziran, the Chinese word for nature, right? You go into bliss, and then you're flying forward, you're cranking. You reach a level of bliss that, frankly, you know, not many people in human history have reached. And then you hit a wall, right? You hit like the next big boss level of the video game you're playing, and then you're like, okay, there's another barrier I'm facing to make it to like this next level of bliss, which you don't have to do. Right? In sacred space, you don't have to do anything. right? But if you do, then you choose then to go back into healing. You choose to take that seemingly one step back, go down even deeper, heal the even deeper thing, and that clears you to like continue forward with your bliss. And you don't have to do that at all. I mean, you don't have to pursue your bliss at all in your lifetime, right? We've talked about this in past sessions. So this going back and forth, when you see the pattern, right, and you see the turn coming around the bend where it's like, oh, it feels like I'm about to take a step or two back now. Instead of resisting it, you're like, okay, like, bring it on, let's do it. Let's see where this thing goes. And you willingly go back 2 steps. You willingly go back in the healing. I guess my point is when you see the pattern where it goes back and forth, like the pistons are firing in alternating pattern, when you perceive that, then when the next piston fires, you don't resist it, you jump wholeheartedly in. And then you jump back sooner. I mean, the whole cycle just ends up going faster when you see it and you embrace it. And you tell yourself that it's okay to go back. Right? It's not all love and light and everything up and to the right, progress unending. It's not linear, it's cyclical. I mean, just look at gestation of a baby, fermentation of wine, the seasons, right? Everything's cyclical. It's not like we hit spring and summer and then beyond summer and even higher summer forever. It's like, no, it cycles back, and that's good, right? It increases the fertility and generativity. So when you see this pattern then, and you hold space for it, this pattern is basically your entire life. Your entire life can be described with this pattern. And what it does then is perspectives like this, symbols, archetypes like this, when you bring them in and you use them as a lens to sort of see your life through, your entire life becomes sacralized, right? The whole thing is sacred, which is actually the truth, right? So the entirety of your life, the victories, the setbacks, all happen within sacred space. The long arc of your entire life sacralizes your entire life overall and as a whole, where your view of your life at the 30,000 foot level, at least, is devoid of fear, threat, and control. Whatever happens, happens. If it ends at this point versus at that point, that's what it happens. I mean, you hold space even for that. Because, and this is part of the meaning of my organization, Preside, right? Where you are presiding over your life, holding space for it in its sacred mode. You're letting your whole life gestate as it will, letting the wine become wine, right? Letting the cocoon do its thing and not forcing it open halfway through. It would be disaster. So the last thing I want to say here is that at the 30,000 foot level, you can see the pattern then of caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly for transformation. And for circumambulation, we have another pattern to like use and inform us on this phenomenon, which is the labyrinth, right? And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Those of you who do healing with me, you're sick of hearing about the labyrinth at this point. But instead of like messing with the screen share, I'll just show you this as an example of a labyrinth, right? So we've all seen images like this. This is a reproduction of the 13 ring circuit labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral outside Paris, about an hour outside Paris. And basically, what to know about the labyrinth is that it is a labyrinth, not a maze, where it is a single track in and out. There are no dead ends. You cannot get lost. Okay. The second is, as you enter, there are all these hairpin turns. When you're in a physical labyrinth, you feel like you're lost. You feel like you have no idea where to go. But because it's a single track, there are only 2 choices to be made: forward or back, right? Or stand still. But I mean that's a temporary choice. Eventually, you're gonna get hungry, right? And you're gonna need to move, which is the power of the profane, right? Fear of eventually cattle prods you to get moving again. And you circumambulate, literally, around the center. There's a deep question about like what is in the center, right? And then after that, you come back out with the prize, with the insight, with the elixir that you've gotten from the belly of the beast, right, from the cocoon. So this is the cocoon. This whole process is going into the cocoon. Either knowing you're doing it and like letting the feeling of being lost just go and protecting that, or you're dragged through kicking and screaming, right? It's like either way, you're going in and then you're going to be there. Stuff's going to happen and you're going to come out again. Going through any loss in life will look like this. Losing a relationship will look like this. Losing your job, having a scary health diagnosis will look like this, right? And so, again, the two steps here are to describe it using a pattern or a symbol. And the symbol of the labyrinth is very old. The first labyrinths, not this style, but the classical Cretan classical labyrinth had been found in cave paintings that are something like, sort of 5,000 to 10,000 years old in Italy and France, in Spain and Italy, actually. So it's very old. There's a full Nerd Fest talk I do if you're like in certain healing programs, and I will spare you that. It's a much longer talk, but if you are in live group advising and if you haven't found it, just email me, I'll send it to you. And the whole point of this is that the labyrinth, as it describes your life, not just any given phase, but your entire life, it is itself a womb. It is a sacred space. The last thing I'll say about it is, just to get to the questions here, is that in the classical myth, this is the center of the labyrinth. The labyrinth is built by Daedalus, right? Daedalus, the one who made the wings for Icarus. Daedalus also built the labyrinth, right? In the classical Greek rendition of the myth, there's a minotaur at the center of the labyrinth, the son of the sort of sacred bull that King Minos refused to give to Poseidon. So Poseidon, cast a spell on his wife Pasiphae, right, daughter of Helios, and she ordered Daedalus to build her a cow, which she then hid into because she was overcome with lusty desire for this bull that Minos refused to give. There's all kinds of symbolism. You can read it as a dream, et cetera, et cetera. So she put herself into this cow, this artificial cow that she ordered, right, Daedalus to build for her, which she did because she's the queen. And then she had her sort of sexual relations with the bull, and then she gave birth to the minotaur, half man, half bull. So this abomination, this thing that is now a source of shame, that you stuff down and lock away, right? In the healing program, we call that lost board member. This is the thing when you go down into transformation, the mask falls off, your minotaur comes back, right? To say, I'm rightfully a part of this family. Shame or not, it's like, I'm a part of it. I have stuff to say and contribute to the direction of your life. And if you stuff me down, your compass is intrinsically decalibrated. And when you have a decalibrated compass because you've hard stuffed down a part of yourself, let's say it's off 15 degrees. Well, like 3 to 5 years out of college, 15 degrees is not a big deal. 25 years out, you're like way off course. And then you need to make a hard turn to get back on track, which is typically called, in traditional cultures, we call that midlife initiation. In our culture, because it's 99% profane and we've lost a lot of these support structures, we call that midlife crisis, right? We call that midlife crisis. And there is no ritual elder to guide you back onto your original track. You're just, having affairs, buying Ferraris, whatever, right? Okay. So, and the only thing I wanted to sort of say about this is that the Minotaur is this like deep abomination. It's the source of shame. But there's a secret, even in the Greek rendition of the myth, as to the true nature of the Minotaur. By the way, for those of you who love this sort of golden thread motif that we touched on in the first two sessions, what's really interesting is that uh, when Theseus, the hero, right, goes down and transforms the Minotaur, he finds his way through the labyrinth with a golden thread. The golden thread is given, of course, by the feminine, by Ariadne, who gives him a golden ball, right? Frog and Princess and the Frog fans, golden ball of golden thread. And this golden ball of thread leads him through the labyrinth. And the golden ball of thread is literally called a clue, a CLEW, clue. And it is the basis for our word clue, like get a clue. So all kinds of interesting connections there. And, the sort of secret embedded in the myth is that the Minotaur is a scary thing, and Theseus has to go down and kill it, which people mistake as suppressing it, but it's a transformation of the cocoon, right? But the name of the Minotaur, in the bottom, I mean, these labyrinths were underground. Actually, in Greece, there is an example of a 3-circuit labyrinth at the temple of Asclepius in Epidaurus. So these labyrinths were subterranean. I mean, I won't go into all that. But the secret embedded in the myth is that the name of the Minotaur is Asterion, which means star. Okay, which is its own form of golden ball. So when you go down all the way deep into the cocoon, into the bowels of the labyrinth, and you meet this thing that you fear the most, that is the source of all your shame, right? Scandal. And like my wife, like contrived to like have sex with this bull. So it's like a shame on her, but it's a shame on me because like I was punished by Poseidon for not giving him his due. Right? So just like shame on shame on shame. So when you go down to meet the product, the sort of manifestation of your deepest shame, if you fight it, that's one thing. If you talk to it and ask it, for instance, what is your name? You realize that it is not the lowest thing, but it is Asterion, the highest thing. Right? You go down deepest into the roots of the tree to find the thing, Asterion, star, that is even above the highest crown of the tree. So that is, an example of the physics that lead us to, sayings in different cultures and traditions where the lowest, the meek shall inherit the earth, the lowest will become the highest. Your greatest shame is actually your greatest virtue. And also from your deepest wound will come your greatest gift to the world. Right? It's just this motif comes up again and again because these are the physics of what we do when we have the courage to go down, explore what we have really sort of hidden with the mask, and then actually reconcile it and bring it back up into the waking world, the light world, so that you can finally find and follow your bliss. Right? So you think you're going down to meet your doom, but you actually find your greatest salvation. We thought that Christ was, crucified by the Romans and all this other stuff, but it actually turned out that it made him even stronger, right? And you see this like in Star Wars when Darth Vader strikes down Obi-Wan, it makes him even stronger with the same motif again and again. Now, when I do live retreats in person, we'll spend like half a day learning how to actually draw and construct labyrinths on paper, in the sand, on the ground, and we'll actually physically walk them. Because it's one thing to talk about it, and then it's another thing to actually do it with your body. So we won't be able to do that here, but basically that's what I want to talk about. That was basically the topic. This idea of circumambulation, the idea that this is how it feels. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, hairpin turns in the dark underground, knowing you're kind of getting closer to your doom, but you're like, you have to keep going, right? You have to keep going. And the attitude of like, when it does happen to you, when the turnabout does happen to you, with the strength of this totem, this symbol of the labyrinth and the idea of circumambulation, hopefully you will be able to feel it and anticipate it a little bit more, and not resist it as much, to sit back and continue to let the wine do its thing and ferment to full flavor, to continue to let the cocoon do its thing, right? So that the butterfly will come out, even as it may be itchy and uncomfortable for you and scary, right? To hold sacred space within yourself for the natural circumambulatory turnings of your life, to like validate them and to see them as valid, and to treat even the circumambulatory turns of your life not with fear, threat, and control, but with love, nurturing, and surrender. That's kind of a pro tip trick, right? If you want. And so as we continue to travel together through this storm, I mean, of the pandemic, but really it's beyond that, right? This is a huge turning for us individually and also for all of society. But it's not the first turn we've had, and it certainly won't be the last, right? And there is real loss. I'm not just like this abstract kind of rainbows and unicorns. It is terrifying down there in the labyrinth, and we are in it. And so as we travel together in the storm of the pandemic, and then even after the storm, right, circumambulation will continue to happen. And these turnabouts will happen, these setbacks will happen, and hopefully what I have just explained about circumambulation and labyrinth will be of some practical utility to you as you navigate the storm and comfort. Okay. So that's the topic I wanted to talk about. And thank you for listening. So let's go now into the questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the time markers here so that when you watch the replay on Crowdcast, you'll be able to skip ahead. And let's see, for those of you watching from Facebook, I'll put a link up to like a replay on my page where there will be chapter markings and you can skip ahead as well. Or you can just, watch the whole thing. Okay, let's do this one. So hey, Artie, what is a good way to learn to read dreams? This is from the last session. How did you learn how to do it? So so there are a number of ways. So the best way is just to read a lot of dreams, or to watch someone, like me, for instance, read a lot of dreams, read books where people are reading myth and fairy tale and dream. And then after a while of just like immersing and listening to the language of dream and symbol, you start to get, kind of fluent, where you kind of understand how in human society overall, across traditions, symbols will come up to mean very similar things, right? And you'll start to see the commonality and universality of some of these symbols. And then on top of that, then you will start to build your own personal vocabulary of what symbols mean to you. So like a dream will come up and it will show you like a ghostly spirit in an upper room in an attic, right? And you'll go talk to the spirit and in your imagination, in your kind of mythopoetic sacred space mode, right? And then, the spirit will say certain things to you. You'll meet the Minotaur, you'll talk to it, and you'll figure out what its name is and what its complaint is, what its recommendations are for your life going forward. And even though I've said, let's say the Minotaur, all the stuff about the Minotaur, when you talk to your own inner version of the Minotaur, if that is what you meet in your dreams, you'll have your own direct relationship with it. So that 3 months later, when another bull or a baby calf or a sort of centaur, which is kind of a cousin of the Minotaur, right, in a way, symbolically shows up, you kind of already know what that means, right? A baby like cow is walking around. It's like, okay, that's like clearly related to the Minotaur. And you can have much more deeper kind of interactions and nuanced exchanges and back and forth with like the counterparty that's like sending you dreams. And so, so if you do, my healing kind of thing every week, not pitching this as a sales thing, right? There are other ways to learn dreams. The weekly sort of live healing, it's basically like this. And we talk specifically about healing topics, and people put their like, they're doing my healing program and they're like in the midst of the labyrinth, right? And what'll happen is dreams will fire up like crazy. And like 80% of these sessions, these weekly healing sessions, are dream readings. So if you do that with if you want to learn how to read dreams, that's one way. If you sign up for those, you'll learn how to you read dreams in Artie style like pretty quickly. So that's one good way to learn. But then you'll be learning kind of my style, and then you will develop over time a style that is specific to you and how you see the world through your lens. I'll skip all this other stuff. I want to kind of move through the questions, but basically you can also, there are books and writers that are very powerful in this area. Let me see what I wrote here. So how did I learn how to read dreams? So I learned from reading a ton of fairy tales. And then finally I was like, I blasted out to my meditation and healing community. I basically put up a shingle and I was like, send me your dreams. I mean, no promises, but send me your dreams. And I started reading dreams as a part of my healing practice. And that's kind of how it just avalanched and snowballed from there. But some authors that I love for dream and fairy tale, the psychologist, I think, psychoanalyst, the psych person by the name of Robert Johnson really does great readings of classical fairy tales. And then, like, to me, right, the grandmaster is this woman by the name of Maria Louise von Franz. And actually, I'll write her. Von Franz. And if you search for her, you'll find books on alchemy, interpretation of fairy tales, interpretation of dreams. She was like a colleague, really, of Carl Jung, but really like an intellectual giant in her own right. And she just kind of chose to slot herself under the Jungian system, but she was she's just this goddess, right? This intellectual like giant that I like certainly worship at the feet of. And the only issue with von Franz is that it's very dense. It's very dense, packed with stuff. So it's not a light, really kind of poolside summer read. Robert Johnson's more like relaxed. Robert Bly, in his Iron John, is more sort of focused on applying fairy tales to male initiation and men's issues. But those are more kind of like explanatory or whatever. And von Franz is just like intense, right? Talking about like number and time and archetype and alchemy. So maybe a little much, but von Franz for me is like a major benchmark. I mean, I'm not Jungian myself, but she's a pure, very strong, stiff dose of that line of thinking. And then with dream reading, right, there's a whole, any kind of divination, tarot, oracle bones, whatever, I Ching. There's a whole range of ways you can use it. Even with divination or dream reading, there's a range of approaches. There's a more profane approach and a more sacred approach. Right? And the more profane approach to me, and there's nothing wrong with the profane approach, right, is not in the temple, but the fortune tellers in the profanum in the marketplace, where you give them a few coins and they'll read your fortune. And of course, in that, it's all like, I'm like getting this psychic tarot card energy reading, right? So basically, you're like tapping into the world of the invisible, potentially connecting into the divine. Right? Where anything is possible. And your question is my request for promotion going to be approved next week? And I'm like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like you can ask anything. You can ask anything. And you're like, am I going to win the lottery next week? And I was like, okay. That's fine. So that's more on the profane, and the more sort of sacred is like, you are plugged into the source, And I mean, for me, the most interesting question is not, and I'm biased, right? Like, I don't care about the promotion. I don't even care about my like deceased loved ones and knowing. I mean, I know they're okay, right? I know they're okay. And if they want to give advice to me, they know how to find me, right? So I'm not even worried about that. I mean, the most interesting question, just to kind of open my cards and sort of be very frank with my biases on this. Because if you're interested in dream reading and you end up learning stuff from me, you need to know my bias, right? And my heavy bias is, if I'm plugged into like the great beyond to ask any question I want, right? The question that is of greatest interest and concern to me is, why am I here? Right? What am I on the earth to do? I don't care about the promotion. I don't care about any of this other stuff. Like, why am I here? In other words, what is my bliss? What is the meaning and purpose of my life? Tell me that, so that I can have clarity and validation and sort of authentication of what I think my path is. Right. And then the rest of it, like, I've got a sword and shield just fine. I've got as much game as the next guy. I can go out into the profanum and I can kick ass and take names and, build whatever it is I'm supposed to build. What I need to know from like higher guidance is like, what am I supposed to do? Right. And that's why like Caesar, Alexander the Great, all of these sort of great sort of, emperors and sort of conquerors of the profane, they, before any major battle, they would go into the templum and reconfirm what their marching orders are. I mean, Caesar and his legions, he can conquer anything, but like, why? Like, are we conquering Germania next or Gaul next, and why and wherefore? Right? What is the higher vision? And so anyway, that's my bias, right? When I ask questions of that mode and look for guidance, and I'm a guy, right? So I have the biases of being a guy. I like one thing. Just tell me the one thing I need to go and like hunt and kill, and then everything else I can like tune out. I don't like to multitask. Okay, so bliss and life direction. Everything else to me is a supporting role. And then, kind of the muse, right? I mean, the one that gives you direction is feminine, right? I mean, I'm not going to sort of get into a whole thing, but obviously she's feminine. So she's your GPS, and then you're like the driver in the everyday world. Okay, so that's my long-winded, of course, answer to that question, and thank you for asking it. I just want to say, oops. Oh, okay. Thank you for this time of shared sacred space. My question: when we feel stuck in a pattern in relationship, for example, and we're working really hard to uncover our lost parts and working to remove masks and continuously honoring sacred space, how do we know whether we're still stuck or simply impatient? I'm waiting for the cattle prod moment, but I wish to bypass that if possible. We all do. We all do. So I'm right there with you. Let me see the notes I wrote. So for me, my answer to this is this sort of circumambulation kind of motif. You're never really stuck. And there is a cyclical movement between, so it's like you're working hard to recover your lost parts, you're working to remove masks, you're continuously honoring sacred space. And the way you're describing it is just like, man, it sounds like you're working really hard, and that's okay. And what will typically happen, I don't know what will happen with you, but what the pattern I've seen a lot is like, we kind of get this kind of work ethic, very modern Western world, Protestant, not in a bad way, Protestant kind of thing of like, if anything good is going to come from this, hard work and suffering and gritting my teeth, getting on with it, must naturally be a part of it. If I'm not suffering at some point, then nothing good can possibly come of this. And it's hard to say this in the modern world, but I have to say, because it's true, that's not always true, right? You don't always have to work hard and suffer for good things to happen. And what will often happen is we work hard, we keep hitting our head against the wall. Like, are you stuck or simply impatient? Maybe both. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being stuck. There's nothing wrong with being impatient. So the way you know it is to like clench your fist very tightly and hit, 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 hit. And you're going to continue doing that. And then at some point, you're going to be like exhausted and you're going to be like, screw this. Nothing works. It will never be better. Just forget it. And you just slump down. And this becomes this. And the minute you do this and surrender in sacred space, boom, the download comes to you. And it's like, you know, it was waiting there the whole time, waiting for you to like, in some sense, stop trying. Right. And I'm not saying that's a rule. So it's like, oh, now I really need to try hard to like stop trying. It's like, just do it however you do it. Take the turns through the labyrinth. If you're trying really hard, continue if you feel like continuing. But I will say, if you try really hard, you won't gain any merit that will then somehow magically exempt you from the cattle prod moment. Right? If the cattle prod moment is going to come, it's going to come. Like there's no judge saying, oh, we'll give her a pass. It's just like you don't get a pass on puberty, right? It's just going to happen. So that's why I sometimes call it a sort of Protestant mentality, because it's like you're worried about punishment. You're trying to achieve merit in order to skip over something. And I'm like, you know, it's like what they say about like crime. Often like the cover-up is worse than the crime. Right? You try so hard to skip over the thing. It's like you're creating more problems and suffering down the line. If you just went straight through and just like took the cattle prod, you turned over the card. What is the cattle prod? Oh, it's like 3 volts. It's like it feels like a little bit of static electricity from a flannel blanket. It's like, if I had known that, I would have just done that and not tried to cover everything up. And for me, my bias is like, let's just turn over the card. Let's just go talk to the Minotaur. How bad can it be? You're worried he's going to kill you, then it's only in your imagination. Let's turn over the card. I mean, with startups, when I was CEO, managing like venture capitalists and like, you know, just like these high flying sort of, you know, engineers in Silicon Valley, I was like, our job is nothing more than to turn over the card that other people are terrified of turning over. So let's just turn it over and then freak out. I mean, you know, if it's really bad, we will freak out. Let's like not freak out until we turn it over. Right? Let's find out and then take it from there. Okay, those are my thoughts, and thank you for sharing the question. Sorry, everything's like skipping around here. Oh, I just want to read this real quick. How do you feel about these sessions being shared as, if you feel this pandemic is forcing you and the world into some kind of transformation you're not ready for, online sessions are being offered by a masterful, okay, blah, blah, blah. These sessions are definitely, thank you. These sessions are definitely inspiring my individual journey, so I'm not feeling the squeeze. We'll all have to move through this together. So beautiful to create something better on the other side. I hope you'll join me. Thank you so much for that expression. I actually put that in emails and Facebook posts, so I want to say thank you for that. I love it. So yeah, I feel great about that. Thank you. And please do forward these sessions to more people if you do find them comforting. I mean, we've done a few sessions now, so you know, hopefully you're feeling that there's no like commerce or a sales pitch or anything like that, and it feels good. So if it feels good, please spread it out, because you know, my anxiety is like, what more? This is my bully. Like when I'm in pandemic, it's like, okay, there are all these people on these sessions, but it's like so many more people are in pain. What more can I do to sort of get the comfort out there to more people? And I don't really know what more. Like, it just brute force blasting it is not really kind of the way I do things. So anyway, it's another transformation for me, what I often like never do, which is ask you all for help, right? Because I like to be like independent and competent and everything. So yeah, I would like to ask you all for help to like forward these sessions. It puts an even greater responsibility and onus on me to like make sure these are very much not commercial, and I take that. So if you like them and you like this time and space, please forward it and get more people in for them. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's do how did this, oh, okay. Now we're jumping around, so, oops. Okay, here we go. Addictions during lockdown. So, hey, Artie, thank you again for creating this time and space. It's been a nourishing oasis. And yet, living alone during lockdown with limited access to outdoor spaces, I find the sacred a very heated, intense place, right? Pressure and containment now, to dwell for any prolonged period. And the usual distractions beckon, the practices that must belong to the profane. I don't know that. I don't know that they must belong to the profane, seeing as they carry an implicit bargain. Drink me, eat me, blank me, and you'll feel better. Or at least escape feeling anything at all. But that's just it. When soothing stops, the pain begins, along with the shame hangover. How could you eat, drink, binge, watch Netflix instead of working out, reaching out to friends, doing something good or useful or productive, while so many people are putting their lives on the line? There seems to be a point at which the soothing starts to hurt, when its shield against the desert storms stops working and just lets in the despair. I'm not hurting anyone actively, but do you have any thoughts or guidance on how to recognize the difference between allowing ourselves time to be free from threats and control and indulging our addictive tendencies? So thank you for this. This is a brilliant, very deep question. And so what I want to say is, so I want to talk about soothing and shielding, but before that, I want to say a sort of larger point about healing. The people who are putting themselves on the line, the esteemed, reverend healthcare workers, even the clergy that are getting sick from even just giving last rites, right, and consoling and comforting people. In an ideal situation, they are following their bliss. And I mean, they can not go to the hospital. They can not go to work. They can feign sickness. They can say, well, I've got symptoms, so I'm not going to go in and work. And yet they're sick, they're coughing, they're short of breath, and they're still going into work. Why is that? Why is that? Right? And for me, when I see that situation, first of all, I'm very grateful that there are healthcare workers in our world and that they've chosen this profession. But at the same time, when I see, kind of people jumping into the breach, right, to do their work, some of them are terrified, and I'm like, I hope they pull out or they stop or they do whatever they need to do. But some of them, and I've spoken to some of them, they're like, they don't say they're happy, but they are following their bliss, right? And if that leads them into a shorter time on this earth, they get that and they accept it. And we see that as heroic, and we applaud them and we honor them and we give them our thanks, which we should, right? All of this it's all valid. But for that person whose bliss is to be a healer, right? That is the number one thing. How much longer you live is also very important, but it is decidedly a secondary concern. Right? I'm not saying this is the way it should be, right? And I'm not taking away any sort of honor or glory for them. They deserve all honor and glory. But I'm simply pointing out the pattern that is when someone is following their bliss. Joseph Campbell, the follow your bliss guy, right? The sort of professor of mythology. He had a great way of describing this once, where he was like, he was reading the sort of 5 levels of like actualization, Maslow, from Abraham Maslow, right? In this talk he gave one in the 70s, I think. And Professor Campbell said, when I read these levels of Maslow, that a person, and this was not what Maslow said should be. It was like just in his work with patients, this is what he observed to be, because he would ask them, and so he came up with it. So this is not Maslow's like sort of values. It's just his observation, empirical observation. So there's no judgment on Maslow himself. He's brilliant. But he was like, the levels are survival, safety, if memory serves, relationships, prestige, and actualization, right? Fulfillment. And I'll never forget this. What Joe Campbell said was, when I look at these 5 things, survival, safety, relationships, prestige, and power / prestige and actualization, he said he thought to himself, these are the things that someone lives for who has nothing to live for. Right now, this was in the early 70s, and people were like shocked. And he had softened it into like, follow your bliss. But in his raw, honest sort of reaction, that was the original form of it. And I was like, I feel that. Right? Because he's basically like, if these are the things, I mean, these 5 things, there's nothing wrong with them, but they are intrinsically, in our language, profane. Right? He doesn't call it that, but we can call it that. They're profane. I mean, if you follow just these 5 things and that's what you're living for, you're basically a glorified animal. A baboon will live for these 5 things, right? A caterpillar, but anything, any sort of other animal. What is the thing that makes us different? It is our impulse toward the divine, is our ability to sort of slide into the realm of the sacred. And when you're in the realm of the sacred and you get the download of what you're actually here for, which is not these 5 things. These 5 things are a platform for the next thing, which is to follow your own, what we call mythic pattern, right? What your bliss pattern is, what your Ziran is, when we talked about it in previous sessions. That is the number one thing. It's just like in divination and dreams, where it's like, I don't ask about these 5 things. I ask about this. This is the thing that matters. This is why I'm here. So once you have this, that will be the number one thing. And to go back to Joe Campbell, he was like, you will think nothing of prestige. You will think relationships will be secondary. All these, and you won't worry about sort of safety, and you won't think nothing about your own survival, if it means standing in the way of the reason why you're even here in the first place. Because if you're not going to fulfill this, then it's like, why even go through the pain of being born in the first place? It's like, we're here, let's like gather up our tools and let's roll, right? Let's do this. And of course, the path is circumambulatory, so it'll seem like you're failing and you're not doing it. But the first task of tasks, if you will, is to figure out what your bliss is in the first place. Right? Get yourself to a point of healing where you can even bear to ask the question. And so, when you know your bliss, right? As a doctor, for instance, you become one of those physicians that flies to Africa because you have something to contribute to the Ebola crisis. Even though everyone around you in New York is like, what the hell is wrong with you? Right? Don't do that. And you're like, I'm not doing it because I should. I'm doing it because I must. Okay. And so for me, when we follow our bliss, every person who follows their bliss becomes a healer in their own sense, because you become a signpost for the rest of us, right? You become a signpost for the rest of us. We're all caterpillars and we see these butterflies flying by. And it's just a rumor. It's like, no, we're not going to become butterflies. That's okay for Jesus because he's the Son of God, but not for us, right? Not for us. None of us are going to become butterflies. Keep your head down, keep eating. But then the butterflies, when enough butterflies fly by, one of them will stop by and it's like, oh yeah, this will happen. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. And then and some of the caterpillars start freaking out. They're like, no butterfly for me, right? But you become a signpost. And you don't have to be a healer. You can be Picasso is a signpost, right? Hemingway is a signpost. Sylvia Plath is a signpost. We're going to read one of her poems later on today. And so So that's the first thing I want to say about following our bliss. If you know your bliss, and in this case, I know this advisee, I know she knows her bliss and she's following it. However, you're circumambulating through soothing, shielding, or whatever, that's all fine. You're still on the path forward to your bliss because you know it. Once you know it, you can't. Once you see the path of your bliss, you can't unsee it. Right? It will eat away at you until you finally surrender and let go and allow the current to take you. You don't even need to pursue it. The minute you let go, the current starts taking you in the right direction. Once you've seen it. Once you've seen it. Okay. So anyway, about soothing and shielding in particular, in the 7-day healing program I teach, we talk about soothing and shielding, and one of the things we say is that when you have a wound that hurts, this emotional wound, you will shield it, and then you will soothe it. Right? Don't hit me again. Protect it, and then I will soothe it. I'll get some numbing agent to make the pain go away. The common menu list of shielding options in our world are money and prestige, perfectionism, right? Perfect home, perfect kids, perfect life, perfect everything. Anger, right? The scowl, stay away from me. Invisibility, basically like not raising your hand, wearing drab clothing, keeping a very low voice, like camouflage. And then people pleasing, right? Like being the class clown or being like, the servant to everyone, like in-laws, parents, kids, everyone, and not leaving any time for yourself. And then soothing. So that's shielding, keeping, the bullies away. And then soothing, the typical list is drugs, sex, relationship, drama, emotional validation of being in a new relationship, alcohol, games on your phone, Netflix, gossip, food, right? The sort of caloric, the dopamine pleasure of food, even though you don't need the calories. Okay. And so for me, soothing and shielding will happen, right? When you get a wound, you will soothe and shield. Any living being will do that. An earthworm, when you electroprod it, will soothe and shield. So for me, there's nothing wrong with soothing and shielding, right? And this is the menu list. I just outlined the menu list of our society of what your choices are. The key is while you're soothing and shielding, it would be nice if, you didn't die, right, from a drug overdose. That would be nice. And it would also be nice if, you didn't hurt yourself or other people. That would be nice, right? So as long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting others, then it's perfectly fine to go into a period of soothing and shielding. So for you, when you're binge watching Netflix, drinking a little bit, sleeping all day, for me, that's okay. That's circumambulation, right? That's going to happen, right? If you didn't do that, you wouldn't have the rest, you wouldn't have the downtime, you wouldn't have this for the further insight to hit you, right? And if you're like, well, come on, let's hurry up. I'm impatient for the insight to hit me. When you have that impatience, you feel like this. Come on, let's go. Right? And that's okay too. Eventually you will wear yourself out and you'll be like, whatever, I'm never going to get the inspiration for my next chapter of the book. And then you let go and then it hits you. So for me, when you feel like watching Netflix, watch Netflix. You're not hurting anybody. Right? You're not wasting time. I mean, when you really need to go out and pay the bills or make money, there's a counterpart of fear threat. You get pulled back out into the profane and you just shut up and take out the garbage. And it's fine. You know how to do that. All that stuff will get done. And then well, I wrote a lot of notes on this one. So I would just say, I'm going to skip through some of this. When you, so when you're in a mode like this, it's okay to have this downtime. And the irony is that the more you berate and whip yourself for doing this, the longer it takes. Right? Because binge watching, eating, Netflix is to get you to this relaxation. Taking a hot bath is to get you to this state. And if you don't hold space for that, right, and you whip yourself going like, bad person, bad writer, bad artist, it will close up again. And then you won't get the guidance of being in the sacred, because you won't be in the sacred. You'll be afraid of your own judgment on your own self, because you're alone in Costa Rica. No one cares, right? But your own inner bully is like whipping the crap out of you. So you have fear, threat, and control. So the ideal is like hold space for yourself. And this is not some like, oh, wellness, self-care. It's like, no, no, no. If you want to get back in the sacred, then you can't complain about your own self. I mean, there are certain boundaries of the temple where it's like, okay, we're not going to like kill ourselves. We're not going to hurt ourselves with drugs. We're not going to, I mean, we're going to do soothing and shielding in a sort of relatively harmless way, like watching Netflix, playing stupid games on your phone, or eating things that like maybe are crap but aren't going to kill you like immediately. That's me. That's me. And so and so for me, the quicker you do that, the quicker you'll get the download and inspiration. Where, because that's what happens, right? You're like a sloth. You're doing nothing. And then while you're lying there, something hits you and you're like, holy crap. And you get all, you need to grab something, you start writing. And before you know it, you're just taking dictation basically. And before you know it, you've written the next chapter of your book. That's how it comes out. Right. So in that sense, watching Netflix is work for you. Right. And it is in a very real way. You just can't call it work in this Protestant, forceful, holding a baseball bat over your head way. It's work in this way. Right? If I mean, especially you as an artist, your only job is to like release in order to receive, to perceive, and then receive and be receptive to the golden thread. Right? It doesn't come when you're threatening yourself. Okay, so that's enough on that. But I hope that was helpful, and thank you for asking the question. Okay. Okay, so this one. Okay, so in healing work in general, and during the pressure and confinement of this current crisis, I struggle with how to hold my privilege without the fear, control, threat of guilt. We have a wealth of resources, including time, space, and relative ease to reflect on our transformation and recreate ourselves, right? But what about the less developed world? Or the people in material or situational poverty right now, children in abusive homes, women in abusive homes, stranded migrant workers, people isolated with severe substance issues. I'm not sure how to enjoy sacred space while I know people are suffering who don't have the same privilege, right, that we do. I know that we're all ultimately responsible for our choices, but there are still larger forces at play, like structural, right, socioeconomic issues. What are my thoughts on this? Okay, so I love this question. Thank you for asking it. So for me, there are kind of two levels. So the world that you're looking out over, for me, there are two levels to the world. Okay. And the way I think about it is that there's a house and it's on fire. Okay. And the two levels of fighting the fire are, number one, we got to drop everything and get the hoses and buckets and fight this fire and put the fire out. And that's totally valid, right? Because there are lives now that need to be saved. Now, on top of that, I will say there are people in our world whose bliss is to fight the fire in the now, like the healthcare workers that are doing this now. And we applaud them, we send them food, we thank them, we praise them, as is absolutely appropriate. And the hope is that as many of them as possible are actually following their bliss. That's the ideal. Okay. Now, with this house fire metaphor, there is a second aspect of fighting the fire as well, which is that the fire that's burning the house is being fed by a broken gas leak in the basement. And there's a second effort where we need to stop that leak. Because until you stop the leak, the firefighting will never stop. The house will never stop burning unless you reach down into the basement and stop the actual leak. And for me, I mean, the work I do, leaving high tech, leaving sort of regular sort of business to do this kind of hippie healing work that I do, is my gambit personally at going after the gas leak and trying to stop the leak. Right, the parts of the house for me that are going to burn over the next month, they're already gone. Right, and there are people going after that now, and I support them. Right, in all these different ways. Even with a session like this, I support them to sort of like squeeze the sponge, come back out into sacred space, and then move back into firefighting mode. And I know many of you here, right? But the thing is, my focus, my bliss, my design, my mythic pattern is to like go in and go after the gas leak that has been there for like millennia, like generations, feeding this fire of our world. I mean, there's a whole longer talk I can do on this, and I don't want to take up too much time, but basically, I'll give you the thumbnail, which is, I mean, for a very long time, I've had the feeling that there's a curse in the Western world. I don't know how it happened, but there's a certain kind of curse. And there are parts of the world, other cultures, but also the natural world itself, that are intrinsically blessed. And there's a whole sort of thing I could talk about of blessing versus curse and what the physics of that are. But the quick answer is that when you have blessing that has been bestowed on you, a person who has not been blessed, who is in a state of not blessing, there is no neutral. If you're not blessed, then you feel as if you are under a curse. And what will happen is that the cursed person will smell the blessing on a person who is blessed and go directly to them and accost them and try to say, well, what is it that you have? There's something you have that I need to like ease this pain that I have. And the person who's blessed is like, I don't know, don't you feel the way I feel? And it's like, no, I don't. It's like, I don't know why you don't. I don't know. I don't know. And then the person that is cursed will then try to, because they're in the profane, they will try to forcefully extract whatever it is you have so that I can try to fill this hole inside of me. All of colonialism, European colonialism on the African continent, on the rest of the world, can be seen through this lens. Now, when you are under a curse, it's not your fault. It's just something that happened through like culture, through circumambulation, whatever, of civilizations. But I was in Bali, Indonesia, for the first time in early January of this year. I was scoping it out as a potential place to like hold one of my retreats this year in 2020. And the minute I got off the plane, I was in my Uber on the way to like the place where I was going to meet, actually my editor, who was going to meet me there. And within 20 minutes, I was just like, I don't want to be here. I don't like this place. It was dark. It was nighttime, so I couldn't even see the people around me. But just from the airport into the car, I felt the pain all around me, the desperate, seeking, hungry ghost pain all around me. And what I felt basically was all Westerners, and I'll count myself as a Westerner, right? All the Westerners around me who had like landed in Bali, basically after the book and the movie, right? Eat, Pray, Love. Everyone went to Bali after that, right? And basically the feeling was like, I'm here to extract whatever it is these people have to try to heal this hunger in my soul, this wound in my soul. Right. And there was this added feeling of desperation where it's like, look, if I've done everything else, if I come here and I can't do it, if Bali itself doesn't heal me, then I really am a screw up. Right. I mean, if Julia Roberts came here and it worked for her and it doesn't work for me, there's truly something like the F wrong with me. Right. That was just the sort of feeling out of the energy all around me. And we will go to the house of one that is blessed over and over again, whether it's Bali or the next place, right? The Maldives or whatever. looking for a way to sort of heal this curse that we feel we're under. And the only way really is to retreat into the sacred in yourself. But long story short, with the Bali story, I ended up meeting with Gauri and her family, and we went into the highlands, into the interior, and it was all fine. But she was like, it's funny, the guru that we're friends with, who has his ashram on Bali and has been, practicing for like 30 years, said exactly the same thing in 2014 or 15 after the movie came out. It's like people are coming here like desperate, wide-eyed, energetically speaking, looking to extract healing. And so why am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this is that the feeling of being cursed is the gas leak in the basement. And if there is an imbalance in the world where you have more resources, more material wealth, more whatever, right? And sitting there, and I count myself in this, right? I'm in the boat with you, right? I'm in San Francisco, bubble in a bubble in a bubble, in the Western world, right? Online, doing my sacred space healing, right? So I'm with you. I'm with you on this. If we're sitting together in a system that puts plenty on our tables, often at the expense of putting food on other people's tables, right? That is a situation. That is a gas leak. There is a gas leak underneath the house, and it's burning the house. Right? When we say this is not sustainable, this imbalance of economic, all that is not sustainable. Um, the gas leak is another way of saying it. Okay, and so in that case, though, if we are the ones who have over extracted resources to put on our tables, what that implies is that we are the ones who are accursed. Because we are taking, right, from the world of the blessed. When you say it's not their fault and it's just these like deep sort of economic sort of imbalances, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are a couple of different ways of healing this. One is like social justice and changing these imbalances and everything else. And that's totally valid. But that is not my bliss either. Right? My bliss is to go in and try to heal the condition of society and people feeling like they're under a curse in the first place. What is the condition that leads us to feel cursed? Well, we need to go to another country or continent or people or culture, right? And try to extract something that we think will heal us, right? And we can talk about cultural misappropriation. I don't care about any of that. I'm just like, what is the thing that is driving the behavior in the first place? Right? And that's the gas valve I want to try to turn off. Probably, not in my lifetime or the next, but if I build this right, it will have legs after I'm gone as well. And so for you then, sitting in your materially safe space, right? But spiritually and energetically feeling guilt over that, right? The most powerful thing that I've seen people do when they're in a situation like that uh, is, first of all, to hold space for yourself and allow the circumambulation to happen. But if you allow that to happen, you will go down into healing, and it will be painful. And when you come, you will have your vision on what your bliss is. And the way bliss works is that all these lines of Zuran end up naturally bending and arcing toward the healing of this gas leak at the bottom of the house. A disproportionate number of people who end up being drawn to me end up realizing that healing, the way I do it, is kind of somehow part of their bliss, and that's cool, right? That's cool. That could lead to more developments in the future that I'm trying to figure out as I go, right? But it doesn't have to be, right? Every person who then comes out of healing and follows their bliss becomes a healer, becomes a signpost for the rest of the world. And if that is what you do, right, then the people around you will start to look to you as a guide. They will come into their bliss as well, right? And and that is how the gas leak at the bottom of that house gets healed. Because I can all but guarantee you, it's nobody's bliss, right, to strip mine and clear cut forest in the Amazon, right? It's nobody's bliss to do that. You need tremendous powers of stuffing things down in yourself to go in and, like, in this mode, actually cut, destroy those parts of nature. Um, and if you think about doing that, and you're like, well, it's just me. I'm just following orders. I just have to do this, right? And this is my job. I have to feed my family. Someone who is in that state of mind where they feel like they have no choice and they have to sort of do this kind of desecration of the sacred of the natural world, um, they are cursed. I mean, if you're not cursed when you're in that state, I don't know what cursed is then. Right? I don't know what cursed is then. Right? They are cursed. I don't see them as the enemy. I see them as like the people needing the most help and healing of all, if we can find a way to reach them. So for me, I'm like, my bias, right, is bliss. My bias is the sacred. But then in service of that, my bias is to always go within and down and do sort of this sort of healing exploration. And when you do that, things tend to sort of sort out around you, right? You find the right path, all this stuff just sort of aligns. When you go into sacred space and find, again, not guidance from me, right? But guidance from your own sort of place of the sacred. Okay, those are my thoughts, and thank you for sharing the question. Okay, I may need to leave some of these for the next session. I don't want our stuff to go too over. This one really quickly, it's a quick question on like being an introvert. I've never had a lot of social contact. It's never really felt like a problem, except for now when, I don't, like, I feel like I'm paying the price for not having a lot of friends in this time of isolation. But at the same time, I don't know. So my answer to this question is nothing you've described here like makes me feel like it's actually a problem. I mean, if it is a problem, then you'll go out and you'll make more friends. You'll reach out to people. You'll apologize. You'll say whatever you need to say to sort of rebuild that network. But I honestly, from the feeling I get from what you were writing here, I don't know if you're going to end up doing that, because it feels like you're okay the way you are. Right? Maybe it's some logistical issues of like, well, if I get sick, who's going to drive me to the hospital or whatever. And there are some like basic alliance making you can make with friends, right? But intrinsically, you are the way that you are because you kind of want to be at some level. And I'm an introvert too. I mean, I'm totally feeling this, right? So the deeper sort of healing specific question is like, why is there a conflict about this issue? Right? You like being alone, you like being an introvert, but you feel like you should not be like this. So there's this feeling of fear, threat, and control. This is a very normal conflict, by the way. People feel like this all the time that I've come across. And it's a very addressable kind of healing specific thing, but that is how I think about it. Right? There's a conflict over this like football of like, how introverted should I allow myself to be? And for me, there's no right or wrong answer. It's whatever you want, right? It's whatever you want. Okay. Okay, so this question, would love to hear any thoughts you have, find it here, on the concept of wounded healers and their roles in the context of this collective transformation we are experiencing. Let me find that in my notes here. Okay. So the concept of wounded healer is kind of a big topic, but it basically comes from the Greek myth of Chiron, the centaur. And Chiron is the centaur who was unlike the other centaurs who were wild, drunken, etc., etc. But basically, he was a sort of wise, seer level centaur, higher form of centaur. And basically, a centaur, right, especially in the form of Chiron, is a symbol of sort of human blended with horse. And a horse is typically a symbol of your body self. So neck down, your instinct, your intuition, your sensuality, your sexuality, your wildness, fused in harmony with your human side, intellectual, linear, spiritual, abstract, right? So spirit is up, soul is down. So mind, intellect, and body, thinking versus feeling, all of these melding in harmony in this graceful form of the centaur. And most centaurs are just ruled by the horse side and they're wild and drunken. But Chiron is this rare centaur that is ruled more by like those sort of executive function, if you will. And this is a Greek myth, so they prize that, right? They prize that. And he was the teacher, right, of Hercules, Achilles, Jason, Asclepius, Patroclus, for that matter. So all of these heroic king fathers would send their sons to Chiron to learn the arts of battle, the arts of music, the arts of healing. He was just this like fountain, this cornucopia of wisdom and information. Chiron was wounded when he was mixed in with the drunken centaurs. And when Heracles fired his arrows into the crowd to like drive them off and get them under control, he accidentally hit his mentor and teacher, Chiron. And these arrows were tipped with poison. Toxic poison. So the word toxic comes from toxon, which is the Greek word for arrow, right? And so, because they were all tipped with poison. And so Chiron spent the rest of his life looking for the cure for this uncurable disease. So he learned the full use of all these herbs and sort of healing minerals, methods and everything, in the process of looking for a cure for himself. So he trained Asclepius, the god of healing. Asclepius then trained Hippocrates, which you're probably more familiar with. So that's the thumbnail of the wounded healer. In other words, you get your own healing power from your own journey with your own wounds. And what makes you a healer is that instead of saying, poor me, I suck, I'm just going to suffer, you say, hey, look, this is a thing. This thing is a thing. This wound is a thing. And she's got one too, he's got one too. So let's just like figure out what to do with this. Let's turn over the cards, see how bad the wound is, and let's see what we can do. Right? We're still in pain. I'm just as in pain with the person who's feeling the victim. But the difference is that I turn from fear and victimhood into a realm of curiosity and wonder. Right? I'm like this magnificent being, and this thing has completely hobbled me. And instead of just having anger and like helplessness, I'm like, huh, that's kind of fascinating, right? What is this thing? What does this mean, right? What is this? Like whenever I have a wound or some kind of physical ailment, like I realize it and I'm like, oh crap, right? And then my next is like, well, what is this a symbol of? Like if this were happening to me in a dream, how would I read it? And I ended up getting like all this sort of juice from it. And typically for me and for people who sort of have an inclination to do it like this, when you actually get the message, the wound goes away, like magically. And the point is, making the pain go away is not why you explored it, right? Asking the question and fulfilling your curiosity is why you do it. And after you get the download and the answer from the sacred, if the pain is continuing to be there, that's okay. I didn't get the download to make the pain go away. The pain was like my flashing thing saying I got an email, so I ran over to get the email. And if it's still flashing, there's probably still more. Hooray, that's great. Then I'll go and get more. That is, by the way, the difference in my mind between curing and healing. Western medicine is all about curing. It's been fabulously successful using the scientific method, staying just actually, frankly, in the realm of the profane, which is why it's so commercializable. And my focus when I'm curing is if you have a pain in the elbow, I'm going to just nuke it with everything to make the pain in the elbow go away. Healing is different, right? Healing is you have a pain in the elbow, and instead of just trying to make it go away immediately, we're like, well, hang on. Why is there a pain in your elbow? Right? And if it's purely medical, it's like, what are you doing? How are you doing your backhand in tennis? So how do we, let's stop that. And then from that, the pain will go away. You don't need to take ibuprofen, right? Um, but there's a larger mythopoetic level of healing too, which is if you have a pain in your elbow, what is that symbolic of? What is that, right? What is the mythopoetic potential meaning of that? What is the archetype of these different symbols? Can you talk to it? Can you find out more? And then can you come into reconciliation with the part of you that is hitting this pain button to get your attention because you've dismissed it, you've marked it as spam, you've blocked it, you've filed a restraining order, right? You don't want to hear from this part of yourself. So it finally needs to, like, take the gloves off and like pull the emergency brake on the train to get you to stop and listen. Mythopoetically, that's kind of how you think about it. So if you are a healer, right, this whole pandemic thing, like with anyone else, will put you into a situation of pressure and containment, and you will tend to have your own transformation as well. I mean, I'm a healer, I'm a wounded healer, right? We're all healers are wounded. And I'm definitely experiencing this myself. Right? I was called to do these kind of sacred space sessions. I didn't even stop to think why. I got the download, I needed to do them. So I started sending emails and putting up posts. And now after the fact, I'm starting to look at everything we've talked about, and it's making me see my own healing practice in a different light, in a deeper way than I've ever had before. I'm seeing the overall umbrella of like what it is I'm here to do. For me, it's like seemingly disparate things that I've done in past, kind of being led around by the muse like a blind pig, right? Fairy tales, meditation, dream reading, healing, bliss, parenting, relationships, healing around body image issues, healing around money, fear issues. Never had an overall umbrella describing what it is that I do. And now I'm starting to see sort of the higher umbrella, and I'm looking at it. I'm just stunned. I'm stunned at what I see through this transformation, and I'm actually slowly digesting it all. I'm in a kind of state of, I mean, as Joyce would describe it, I'm kind of in this state of aesthetic arrest. I'm kind of just dumbfounded by it, right? And gaping at it in awe and wonder. And I can tell you that my very strong feeling is that for all kinds of healers, especially the healers who are in the medical field, right, in the middle of New York, Italy, all these sort of hotspots right now, dealing with all this, they are going through transformation too. There are physicians and nurses and healthcare workers that will come out of this, and they will look at their role as a healer in our world in a completely different way. They're in the cocoon right now, and we love them for it. Like we want to send them cupcakes and food and masks and everything in the cocoon, right? But when they come out, they will have their own transformations, and in their own ways, it will be sort of exciting and wondrous as well. That's kind of my feeling of it. Okay, I hope that was helpful, and thank you for asking the question. How are we doing on time? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to try to keep this and not go too over time. See how many more questions there are. Okay, there are quite a few more questions. Let me save some of these questions for the next week. Yeah, let me save some of these questions for the next week. More about bliss and sacred space. And it's 11:40, so let me move on to the next step of this. So the next two things I want to do, thank you for asking the questions. And I think we'll have a pretty full session next week at this point as well, with all these questions that I'm moving over. But what I want to do now is last two things here before we close sacred spaces. I want to suggest another sacred space exercise for you to take out of the session to kind of just play around with in the next week. And then we'll have a poem, and then I'll close the session. So what I want to do for the sort of suggested exercise here is I want to jump off from our talk about the labyrinth and circumambulation and the power of circumambulation. And I guess the exercise is, in past sessions, we've talked about going into the sacred and then bringing the sacred out with you into the profane. Okay. And then also last week, I think the exercise was noticing when you're already kind of slipping into the sacred, like without even intending it. You just notice I'm in the sacred right now. Okay. And for this week, I think what would be kind of fun and interesting is to try instead to keep an eye out for the turnabouts in the labyrinth. In other words, to I can't even, where am I? There I am. Okay, so you can see this. To keep an eye out for the parts of the labyrinth where you think you're going straight, it's going great, and then boom, you hit a turnabout. Okay, which feels like a failure. And when we talk about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, this thing twists around so much that after a while you can't even tell if the 2 steps forward are forward anymore. And that's the beauty of the disorientating aspect of the labyrinth. When you walk this thing, you naturally feel yourself going like this. Walking it is a form of walking meditation, which is why in real life in groups we draw it in the sand and we walk it. And so the exercise then will be to just go throughout your day as you are, but then to try to keep an eye out for the turnabouts, the dead ends. You feel like anything you hit during the day that feels like a dead end, a hairpin U-turn on your life path, a failure. And then as soon as you hit it, you're going to feel the frustration of like, God, can't believe this happened again, right? And then when you feel that frustration, see if you can not stuff the frustration down, but feel the frustration and then say kind of like there it is. There it is. There's a U-turn. I don't like it anymore. Right? I'm still feeling the full brunt of the frustration. But it's like, there's my 1 step back. There it is. Now you're in the middle of a battle with some jerk, some person, like your landlord, right, asking for the rent, right? And you're like, okay, you don't have to pay your mortgage, so I shouldn't have to pay your rent. Right? This whole argument back and forth. And when you feel the frustration, you can be in the back of your mind like, there it is. There it is. Okay. Now, in the heat of battle, you're still fighting just as hard. I'm not saying don't fight. I'm not saying so. No, everything's gonna be okay. No. If he's being a jerk, you want to fight him because you're in the profane. It's okay to fight. But in the back of your mind, when you hit that frustration and the labyrinth goes like that, it's this almost delicious thing when you feel it and you're like, there's the 1 step back. And it's almost like when a vintner is making wine. Okay, and halfway through the process, she taps the barrel just to check it. And you go down into the cellar with her and she lets you taste it. And you're like, oh, that's disgusting. That's like sour vinegar. I taste like mold. I taste all this horrible stuff. And she's like, settle down. That's where we are in the process in the circumambulation. Right? It tastes like 1 step back, but you need it in order to make it all the way through. But with her, she's such an experienced vintner that when she tastes it, she tastes the same nasty stuff you do, but to her, it's like, there it is. I can taste the emerging blackberry. I can taste this thing that I thought was nasty in my 20s, but now as a 50-something winemaker, I'm like, I know what that's going to turn into. And it's music to my ears now when I taste it, because I know this is going to be an incredible vintage. And it's like, you're tasting the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, I don't taste any of that. But when you've seen the pattern enough, sometimes even when you stub your toe, you're like, God, I gotta move this bed. I'm gonna throw this bed out the window. It's always in the wrong place. But in the back of your mind, you're like, there it is. There's, oh, my foot hurts again on the left side. I know what that means. I know the last time that happened. I'm going to go and I'm going to do my thing in sacred space and find out what this email is all about. There it is. Okay. So it's the hairpin turn triggering not this reaction of, oh, I'm a failure, I suck, the gods are punishing me, woe is me. Again, not punishment, but transformation, right? Not malice, but paradox, right? Do you see something else like malice, the gods are like punishing me, or is it paradox? The gods have sent you an email and you simply need to figure out the Rubik's Cube of how to decode it, right? Which means its intention is not malicious, right? Punishment versus transformation, malice versus paradox. And there are those dozens of these that I could, but I'll spare you. So rather this feeling of like, there it is. There is the turn in the labyrinth. And in your mind, you see the labyrinth fully again, and you start to savor the fullness of the pattern, of the overall pattern, which itself is sacred. The entire labyrinth is sacred. Every turn is sacred. And you relax into it, right? Almost like you get a stub toe, you get an unexpected tax bill, and then you grimace at first, and then you're like, oh, okay, there it is. There's my baby. There's my baby. There's the turn in the labyrinth. And you sink into the hot tub. It's like you first get in, it's like, ow, it's hot. And then you're like, get back into it. Okay, and it's not, the temperature hasn't changed. The water's still scalding, but you like acclimate to it. And now, when you savor the turns, right, you know this racetrack and you're going around at 80 miles an hour, you're going to take this hairpin turn and you see it coming, you like brace yourself. And instead of going, we're going to die, you brace yourself going like, ooh, right? You're really sort of enjoying the turns. So metaphorically, what that would mean is like, you're still fighting the tax bill. You're like, this is an incorrect tax bill. The calculations are wrong. I'm not paying this, right? And you still do battle with the bully, but inside you are relaxed. And the image someone came up with is, this is a really old movie, but it's like that movie, The Matrix, at the end when Keanu Reeves, right, is fighting the terrifying villain agent with one arm behind his back doing kung fu. And the reason he can do this is because he has gone through his caterpillar cocoon butterfly transformation. He actually died in real life and then came back, right? And he sees the pattern now. He sees the green lines of everything. You see the labyrinth around you. And because you see the pattern, you can anticipate anything you throw at me. I can see where it's coming from and I can block it with one arm, right? That is this feeling of realization. You see the deeper pattern and you're still fighting, right? There's like 2 more sequels where he was like fighting the good fight. So you're still fighting, but you're relaxed inside because you see the overall pattern and you see your active participation in it as a player, not as a victim. So when you see the pattern, you're still fighting the same fights. You're still fighting injustice. You're still fighting overprivilege on one side and underprivilege on the other, right? But within you yourself, the gas leak has been turned off. And because I found the gas leak in myself, I can start to see the gas valve in everybody else around me. And I can start reaching out and turning it off in them as well. It's person by person right now, but scaling it more and more. And when you do that, even though you're fighting, you are still in the sacred. And that's how the sacred goes from 50% to 70% to even 99%. You're in the sacred all the time, even as you're counting out bills at the market and like making sure the vendor doesn't cheat you on the change. Right? You are still in the sacred even when you do that, when you have this kind of lens on. Okay, so that's the exercise. When you hit the frustration of the turnabout or the dead end, you say, there it is. There it is. And when you say there it is, you see it enough, you will follow it all the way around to when it comes back to 2 steps forward. And you will start to link the 2 in your mind. but you'll start to link the moldy flavor halfway through to like the sweet raspberry notes in the wine at the end. And once you make that linkage, when you taste the moldy flavor, you're like, ah, there it is. Crazily enough, you get the tax bill and you're like, God, I can't believe this is coming up. And it's like, but it is coming up. So I know what that means. There it is. And you like pick up the phone and you like fight. Right? Okay. So that's the exercise. Give it a try. Impressions, other things, please email me. I love to hear back from you. All right. So the last thing I want to do, we're actually kind of on time here, which is amazing. Let's have our poem. Let's have our poem. And the poem I'm going to read this week is by Sylvia Plath, female poet, feminine poet. And she was recommended to me by an advisee. And I want to read what she's written, and then I'll give the poem. So she was the one who suggested this poem to me. And I just want to say that if there are poems that are near and dear to your heart that are significant for you, that you think would be interesting to read in sacred space here, please send them to me. Email me, message me on Facebook. I would love to receive the poems that are dear and cherished to you, and share that, because a poem that has been with you your whole life is a temple and sanctuary that you go into when you read it and reread it. And so if you would like to share that with me, I would love to receive it, and then potentially pick some of them and share them here as well. So she says, as a healing advisor / guide, you seem acutely aware of our world being heavily steeped in the masculine patriarchy, not so much in the sacred feminine. And you strive to recognize and realign any perceived imbalances in the spaces you create, or so it appears to me. Thank you for that. Along those lines, would it be possible to include more of the sacred feminine and possibly the mythopoetic as expressed by women? Oh, I love the way you said that. The mythopoetic as it's expressed by women. I could just like sit with that phrase all day long. That is the poem right there. The mythopoetic as expressed by women. Okay. Where was I? Sorry. She goes on to say, I've been revisiting the work, the poetry of Sylvia Plath, for instance. Her women series, Childless Woman, Barren Woman, Heavy Women, all of which, as far as I can discern, have been grossly misinterpreted by men and women alike to be about the personal, relatively limited experience of the poet herself, with or without child. And that's one level, perhaps. But to me, Barren Woman, the second poem, speaks an entire world bereft of the sacred feminine. It's an empty, bloodless temple stripped of all life. And then she gives the poem. So I totally agree with that. I haven't read a lot of criticism of Sylvia Plath, like essays or whatever, but yeah, her poems, to me at least, are all, I mean, she's speaking in her poems as the goddess in our world. I mean, she is a poet, and she's a feminine poet, and the muse is feminine. So the muse is speaking through her as herself. So if anyone reads this poem as like, well, she didn't have kids and she was barren, or I was like, that's absurd to me. That like makes no sense to me. That's the profane reading of the poem. Well, historically, we know she was having conception problems around this time, so she wrote this poem. It's like, that's not how I read it. This is a sacred expression of the feminine power of our world. So I'm just going to read this poem. I usually read it twice, once with my color commentary and the second time straight. I may actually, it's a short poem, I may read it more than twice because it's just amazing. So this is a poem read by a woman, and I'm a man. So I want to say thank you for sharing this poem with me. And I would be honored to read Plath but as a man, I am reading this to you as by your invocation and invitation. Um, um, so, so yeah. So I accept your invitation to read Plath, and because of that invitation, I feel comfortable reading it. Barren woman. Empty, I echo to the least footfall. Museum without statues, grand with pillars, porticos, rotundas. In my courtyard, a fountain leaps and sinks back into itself, nun-hearted and blind to the world. Marble lilies exhale their pallor-like scent. I imagine myself with a great public, mother of a white Nike, and several bald-eyed Apollos. Instead, the dead injure me with attentions, and nothing can happen. The moon lays a hand on my forehead, blank-faced and mum as a nurse. That's it. It's a beautiful poem. Thank you for sharing it. The way this poem hits me is that she's speaking as an empty museum. Empty, I echo to the least footfall, museum without statues, grand with pillars, porticos, rotundas. And this museum has been looted, right? The reason the woman is barren is because she's been looted and everything has been stripped from her. The statues of Nike, victory, the goddess of victory. The statues of Apollo, which are sort of masculine, kind of associated with patriarchy, because Apollo does kill the Pythian serpent, which is a symbol of the feminine, and took over her oracle at Delphi. So Apollo is kind of the herald of the patriarchal kind of era, one of the heralds of it. And it's a cycle, right? I mean, eventually we will be in a matriarchy again, not in our lifetimes, but in our civilization, right, in humankind. So it is this cyclical thing, and so all the things that are of note and movable have been stripped out. So you call this a barren, empty museum, barren woman. But at the same time, she says it's a museum without statues, but grand with pillars, porticos, and rotundas. So in other words, the museum itself is glorious and sacred. The space held by the museum is still there, and the profane world does not have eyes to see. Like a barren woman, you're like, oh, she's barren, so she's of no use. And it's like, right, I'm not going to curse in sacred space as much now, but it's like, yeah, F you, right? It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not, the purpose of woman is not for your utility. And she punctuates it with pillars, porticos, and rotundas. Within this space, there are pillars, which is like phallic, kind of masculine, porticos and rotundas, right? The feminine womb, cocoon-like images. And all of these are intrinsic in the structure of the goddess, of woman, and cannot be looted and taken away, right? But you take away everything else and you call her barren, and you kind of just denigrate the implicit sort of power of what she is. A part of this is, in my courtyard, a fountain leaps and sinks back into itself. So there's still life inside, sort of within the museum, that you couldn't steal it, so you left it there and you kind of devalued it because you couldn't steal it. But it is intrinsic. This thing, this space of the museum, this barren woman, this goddess, is still alive, right? She's there. She's been stripped bare, but she's still there, and her power is still there because her power is in the nurturing sacred space. For me, when I walk through the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which you've ever been, right? There's the Greco-Roman section. There's all these amazing sections, but the real show for me is the structure itself. Walking through the grand halls, right? The pillars, porticos, and rotundas of the Met are itself the grand thing. And you'll see like sort of columns from like the Parthenon and all these stuff. I mean, in 1,000 years, we'll be looking in the museum at like this cornice of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, that fabled city of old. Right? And you just don't have eyes to see it right now because you can't cut it off, take it away, and make it into something separate. Because the feminine is holism, it is the whole thing. So in my courtyard, a fountain leaps and sinks back into itself, none-hearted, right? Not procreative, and just sort of locked in the sacred, and blind to the world. Marble lilies, so this like sort of symbol, a flower is a symbol of the full. It's like a pillar and portico. It's a combination of masculine and feminine. This like mandala of the whole, fully realized, integrated self. Because a flower has masculine and feminine sex organs in it, right? It can self-pollinate. So a flower is this sort of mythic symbol of this. But the marble, the lilies in this space are marble, so they're frozen, they're calcified, and exhale their pallor. Pallor is the scent of a dead body, like scent. So this is a very dead place. I imagine myself with a great public, with people coming in and out. Mother of a white Nike, right? A acknowledgement that victory comes from me and is housed in me properly. And mother of several bald-eyed Apollos, where Apollo, right, the sort of far shooter, the arrow, the sort of masculine power that moves through the world, is my son. It comes from me. It comes from the fertility of me. But nobody recognizes that. Instead, the dead injure me with attentions, and nothing can happen. The moon, another symbol of the feminine, lays a hand on my forehead, blank-faced, and mom is a nurse. But that to me is a hint of changing things, because the moon is changes. It has the three sort of cycles, just like the cycle of the feminine. The classical colors, right, pre-Hellenic, pre-Christian, are white, red, and black. White for the white of girlhood, of innocence, of initial sort of purity of that girlhood phase. The red is the red of menses, and the red of childbirth, right? The full flowering of the motherhood of the feminine. And then the black is the black of the wise woman, the crone, the saga, the striga, right, in Italian. And we've banished the wise woman, right, because of patriarchy, right? Only priests, only men can be priests. We call them a witch, and we mean that to be an insult when it's not, and we burn them, right? And we take away all their power. It says a lot in our popular culture that I can say Gandalf, Dumbledore, and Obi-Wan, right? But I can't say the feminine version. I can maybe say Rey in Star Wars, now only in the past few years. I can maybe say Professor McGonagall, right? But she doesn't run Hogwarts, right? She's just a faculty member. I have to say, imagine a feminine Dumbledore, Gandalf, Obi-Wan, Yoda, which is, which touches the jugular of the wound of the patriarchy. I can't even name positively the characters of the feminine wise woman because they've all been banished in the black crone. So girlhood, full motherhood, and then elder wise woman, right? Sage, feminine sage's saga. And the moon reflects this, waxing, full moon, and then waning. Right, cycle of the moon. There are no similar cycles of the sun. So when it's the moon that's your nurse, the wheel is going to continue turning. And eventually the museum will be filled again and be fruitful, eventually. Right, and that's the feeling I get from this. Speaking of the goddess through her female poet, Sylvia Plath. So I love this. And the fact that we, this perspective of the feminine is not that, we've been wronged and we need to go back and like fix things. It's like, no, the wheel is going to continue turning. Because the cyclicality of the world, of the universe, is itself feminine. I mean, the universe is feminine. Masculine are the things that stick out and are cut off and distinct from it, right? And eventually they like mold back in. I mean, you see this in our biology where we're all feminine first, and then some of us split off and become masculine, right? Sort of biologically. And so here it's not even, it's just a sadness. It's, you get the feeling that she is in the cocoon herself, but with the moon as her nurse putting a hand to her forehead, it will eventually turn and the butterfly will come out again, right? The winged statue of Nike that you see in the Louvre will come out again and be restored to the museum. That's my feeling. Beautiful poem. All right, so let's read it again without my color commentary so you can have the full feeling of it. Sylvia Plath, Barren Woman. Empty, I echo to the least footfall. Museum without statues, grand with pillars, porticos, rotundas. In my courtyard, a fountain leaps and sinks back into itself, nun-hearted and blind to the world. Marble lilies exhale their pallor-like scent. I imagine myself with a great public, mother of a white Nike, and several bald-eyed Apollos. Instead, the dead injure me with attentions, and nothing can happen. The moon lays a hand on my forehead, blank-faced and mum as a nurse. Thank you for that invitation and opportunity to read Sylvia Plath. Thank you. I appreciate you. All right, so now I'll close the session. So our next session is next Sunday. It's free and open. Please invite others as you feel so moved. I'll move some of these questions over into the next session, and put up more questions as you would like. And also, if you have your own poems to recommend and suggest, please send them in as well. Okay. All right, so I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with me. Go in peace. I give you my blessing. I bless you. Bestowed with my blessing, go in peace, free of fear, free of threat, and the undue control of others. Have a great day. Have a great week. And I will see you all in the next session. Thank you.